Hey friends, welcome back to the Lightcast. Today we're going to be talking about Age of Imprisonment and founding along with refounding arguments. I originally planned to cover founding versus refounding in a follow-up to How Old is Hyrule Anyway? But I think with this morning's creator's voice, that's more important than ever. So if you haven't caught it yet, to catch you up, the creator's voice adds a comment that the Ganondorf that we are contending with is the original Ganondorf. And that statement has a lot of implications for lore and overall meaning of an interpretation of events later on in the Era of the Wilds. And I wanted to talk about that, so let's dive in. The creator's voice for Age of Imprisonment is only about 5 minutes long, and I highly recommend you take a look at that if you haven't seen it. It's just really interesting in general. It's also really nice to see the graphics that were used in the Era of the Wilds actually in a very crisp form. And as a quick side tangent, there's some clips of one of the memories from Tears of the Kingdom. And based on the resolution of it and the quality and the detail of the trees, I believe that the rumors are true that all of the memory cutscenes have been upgraded to 4K as well. And I'm really looking forward to that. I think when that comes out, I plan to do some analysis on things that I've been noticing in the background of many of those memories for a while, but are impossible to say because there's not really any... It's like at some of the distances, they're blobs. Anyway, now, side tangent over. I recommend checking out that creator's voice. One of the lines that is set in it pretty quickly. I think it starts around 53 seconds. Is this game takes place during the Imprisoning War, which is shown in fragments in The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. In this Hyrule Warriors game, you'll see how the people contended with the threat of the original Ganondorf. This was very exciting because it starts to put us in the realm of definitive placement for the events that we see in the past in Tears of the Kingdom. Couple this with the fact that on April 3rd, when Age of Imprisonment was announced, one of the things that was included with the publication about the game on Nintendo's own website was a very clear note that the game was canonical. So we now have a Hyrule Warriors game that Nintendo has definitively said is canon. Couple that with the fact that the Ganondorf we see is the original Ganondorf, and we're starting to look at being able to see prehistory truthfully and seeing the founding of the kingdom before time splits. I am of course really curious to see what the impact of this is to existing more specifically around Ocarina of Time. One of the other notes that is mentioned in the creator's voice is that we're going to get to know the sages behind the masks a little bit better. I'm assuming that means we're going to actually get to find out their names. At least that's what I'm hoping. One of the comments that was brought up about this when talking about it with several people today was that, what do you do and how do you interpret the lore if it turns out that the sages are actually, that their names are the same sages from Ocarina of Time? Because that has been a legitimate fear of a lot of people. Is the retconning of the events of Ocarina of Time. I have very strong suspicion that they won't be. I don't have a super lot of evidence for that other than one of the things that Nintendo is very good about is being consistent with art style and how they represent characters. For example, if you go back and look at a lot of the older 2D games after the original Legend of Zelda, like from the NES era, and you look at the way that they've demonstrated Zelda's dress in Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, A Link to the Past, A Link Between Worlds, her royal garb in Echoes of Wisdom, her dress when Tetra transforms into Zelda or demonstrates as Zelda. It is the same dress, with the designs sometimes slightly changing, most of the time not. They're very consistent with art. And right off the bat, one of the things that I started analyzing back when we first got a look at the ancient sages a couple years ago was if any of them matched the sages from Ocarina of Time or had characteristics that were similar to them. And one of the things that I noticed is while the Goron ancient sage does seem to have that same, I guess we'll say, hair and beard style of like Darunia that you see with many Gorons who end up being leaders of their group, the Gerudo sage does not actually match Naboru too much. And I would assume that if it was actually meant to be that sage, that would be something that they would adhere closer to. That said, totally if I was them and I was planning to remake those games or update their styles, maybe I might update and go with a different art direction, so that's why I leave it open to the chance. I don't think that they will use the names of those sages. And the reason why is because the divine beasts were named after sages, and that helped to seal a version of Ganon, which we're going to get into in a minute, the other Ganons that have appeared. But the history was so suppressed from the founding period that is a reason why the ancient sages aren't recorded anywhere. And if I don't believe that they'll end up being the same in the end. And finally, before we get into founding versus refounding, I wanted to call out and talk about what it would mean, essentially, for other Ganons that have appeared in light of this information that Ganondorf that we're contending with is the original one. It would mean that the founding theorists who have proposed that incarnations of Ganon since the sealing are merely manifestations of him, that they were right. And that is backed up by masterworks, which we're going to go into. But essentially, it puts us in a place where Ganon from Ocarina of Time, and then subsequently he survived all the way through to the end of Twilight Princess, the Ganon in Nulling to the Past, the Ganon in the Wind Waker, every incarnation of him, all of his resurrections, were just manifestations of his hatred and his greed for the kingdom. And a lot of people have had a hard time swallowing this and understanding and agreeing with that. But I think that there's like a apt comparison that we already have that is really, really important. One of the things that we know since the release of Skyward Sword anyway is that the goddess reincarnates. The exact mechanics of it are still mostly unknown. And what I'm going into there is like, is it based on a reincarnation cycle that comes from the real world, like a Vedic reincarnation cycle, something like that? Like what it is, who knows? But if the goddess Hylia can reincarnate from the will of her own spirit, there's no reason that a being as powerful as Ganon couldn't do the same. So, with that out of the way, I'd like to jump in and talk about founding versus refounding arguments. And this was based on me trying to put together a list of things that I felt like should be observable in a refounding scenario. If you see my videos, you know that I tend to analyze based on evidence, and one of the reasons that I drew the conclusion for founding being legitimate and made mention of such in How Old is Hyrule Anyway, and essentially asserted that the founding of the kingdom did take place in the era of prosperity, and like what we were seeing in Tears of the Kingdom was actually the original founding, was for these reasons that I'm about to mention. I would expect to see ruins of the former kingdom prior to the founding we see, if it was a refounding scenario, at notable sites such as Hyrule Castle, villages that would have been wiped out if their architecture was actually advanced enough that they would have survived, like, say, a fire. If it was a refounding in the Downfall timeline, I would have expected Ganon to be present, not Ganondorf, but let's just say that it's a reincarnation or a re-manifestation. Even still then, one of the things that we see after the point of A Link to the Past going forward is we don't see a human version of Ganon ever again. He is always Blue Pig Ganon, and it's very consistent across all of the artwork for the Downfall timeline games, with the only real exception being Adventure of Link, and the silhouette of Blue Pig Ganon is actually there. It's just not. It's just red and black. If it was refounding in the adult timeline, there should be no Zora, because all of them turned into Rito. If it was refounded after Ocarina of Time, Twin Rova should be older than they are in the memories. Groups may or may not have written records from a previous kingdom or make mentions of such a thing. Many of the groups did not actually keep records, or the records didn't survive over the ages. In the case of the Zora, that is not true, and when they talk about records of the past, specifically around the deeds of Ruto, they refer to the kingdom as a contiguous thing and not as a past kingdom or a fallen kingdom. If we were seeing a refounding in the adult timeline, we should see no Sheikah, because there are no Sheikah. I mean, obviously there are some clues here and there. Zeltic has a video about this, about the Kabama in the Wind Waker having some signs of Sheikah, as well as the teacher as well. Highly recommend checking that out if you are into good conspiracy theories like that. Similarly, to have a complete refounding, like say a previous kingdom collapsed entirely, you should have reduced sense of religious symbols on royal structures, or people who don't know what those religious symbols mean because of lost history. And I, for one, find it to be, I am very skeptical of the idea that they would lose their entire history, but not the history of their own religious practices. Because there would be enough people who witness those things that there should be a collective, either like a collective loss or a collective remembering of like a previous kingdom, and all the things that go with that. If there was a refounding, we shouldn't see existing monuments from different groups that make mention of known history, because theoretically the history is lost because the kingdom is refounded entirely, which you more or less have to have a complete loss of your own history to get to the point where refounding is even like feasible, because like the implications of what would cause a scenario where the kingdom collapses on such a level that refounding becomes viable, we're talking like complete destruction, like razed to the ground, everything. Furthermore, I don't feel that there are very good moments in time where a refounding actually makes a lot of sense based on these observations. Because you need some catalyst event, right, that destroys the kingdom. And in the adult timeline, we witness the destruction of the kingdom and the founding of a new Hyrule. In the case of the downfall timeline, the kingdom got beat so bad that they lost most of their history, as evidenced by the things across many games that are remarked in an in-universe or from an in-universe perspective by different NPCs that are actually completely incorrect to what we witnessed in those games. So with fairness to the refounding theorists, I wanted to at least try to put together what I felt like would be like one moment in time would this happen, a refounding happen. For them to have history that survived and to not be too far down the line, there are a couple moments. One of those would be between the events of Ocarina of Time and A Link to the Past. That'll be one. I say that with respect to the fact that of the link between them on the official timeline. It doesn't account well for the fact that there are a few logical things that need to really be sorted out. The so-called hero's defeat needs to be shown at some point, I think. Although I believe that the reason why it's labeled as defeat on the official timeline is based upon an in-universe understanding of the events that happened from those characters rather than being the actual events that happened. Regardless, moving on. It's like the moment, but before A Link to the Past would be the moment, I think, for refounding. That would be one place. Another place would be if by some complete reversal of the wish on the Triforce, somewhere at the far end of the adult timeline, some off-screen event happened that caused Hyrule to be refounded in its original location. And a lot of that comes from the fact that if it's in the past of the events of New Hyrule, then what is the past of New Hyrule? We know when it was founded, and Spirit Tracks takes place within a few hundred years of founding, I want to say. I need to check myself on that one. There are no signs of any of the, other than terrain matching, which it matches across all timelines anyway, regardless of what happened. There's no signs of any of the structures and buildings of like Spirit Tracks. Like Spirit Towers are missing, the tracks are missing. There are tracks in the sky, but the Sky Islands have been there for a very long time, since right after founding. And then it gets into, we also know who founded New Hyrule. So I don't think New Hyrule is a good candidate for that. So that's why I say, like, there had to be some sort of off-screen thing that happened that maybe take them back to the original Hyrule. There's no signs to really indicate that the kingdom experienced a collapse level event in the child timeline after the events of Twilight Princess. Even if you're okay with the placement of Four Swords Adventures, we don't really have any good evidence to support the idea that a collapse level event was happening around that time. So that had to be an off-screen thing again. And then I think just because the downfall timeline is so thoroughly documented, like each game references each other game in some kind of way, we know kind of a rough passage of time from descriptions given by NPCs in those games of like how much time it's passed since certain events happened, that a refounding would have to happen at the very tail end of the timeline after Adventure of Link. And there's no indicator of that either, unfortunately, because the ending of Adventure of Link is that all the Triforce is recovered in a new era of prosperity is actually on Hyrule's doorstep. And I know that I'm going pretty hard on refounding here, and I just want to say, like, if that's something that you believe, that you would still believe in light of, like, new information shared from the creator's voice for Age of Imprisonment, that I trust that if people are coming to that conclusion, they've come to that conclusion for a reason. And so I do believe that many things were open to possibility, at least before today, and it's a question I've gone back and forth with on my own mind. It's what caused me to start analyzing points to see, like, what I thought happened. And I didn't really have any one of, like, whether it be founding or refounding. I didn't really care which one it was. I just wanted to know which one it was for other reasons, because I enjoy analyzing the lore, and if airing it out admits a giant puzzle to me, so it's like having that answer is important. It's for the analysis of the evidence over time of a lot of the games all of the facts and the data that I just don't find that refounding is really feasible. Again, if you do find that it is feasible and possible still, even after today, I respect that because, again, I respect that people come to the conclusions that they do for reasons, and I trust them to, people to check against their own biases. I'm sure somebody out there may be laughing that I'm saying that, but really I do. I think that most people, aside from getting the comment sections that are filled with trolls where people are just trying to just fuck with people who actually enjoy theorizing about Zelda, I do think that there are plenty of people that I know that are really, really well-versed theorists in the lore who believe that refounding is true, regardless of the evidence, and that's cool with me. Whatever people believe is what they believe. I personally believe it's founding. Now that everything has been put together, and all the data's kind of like started to come together, the stuff that we're hearing today, I think the only thing that's really left to really confirm that, to remove doubt, is actually playing Age of Imprisonment and seeing what unfolds during that game, and if it contradicts anything that we've been told today. But other than that, I suspect that one of the reasons they're being so intentional too here is because of some of the backlash and the criticism around the brokenness of the lore of Tears of the Kingdom. Because as much as I enjoy the Era of the Wilds as a whole, like all of it put together and summed up, the delivery of the lore in Tears of the Kingdom is incredibly confusing to me, the way that they presented it. The lore itself is not confusing, makes complete sense to me, but the delivery of it is very chaotic, to put it mildly. And I'm hoping that the reason that they've chosen to label this as being canonical on their own website on purpose, and that the creator's voice is being intentional, saying this is the original Ganondorf, they're trying to be more intentional about what they mean. And I hope they continue to do that going forward, because if you really want the series to be accessible by everybody, then wrapping up every single little detail in a puzzle is not a really great strategy for people who don't have anything more than a few hours a week to play or enjoy the games. Even me, with this being very much a special interest of mine, there are parts of it that I'm just like, I don't have time to go into this, like this is too much. So I'm kind of hoping for more intentionality going forward when it comes to explaining what the lore actually is. We don't need everything to be a puzzle, we just need enough things to be a puzzle. If you have made it this far, thank you so much for giving me your time. I'm very excited to see what becomes of Age of Imprisonment and the questions that it might answer, and the new questions it will probably introduce. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.